So Lau goes on to say, so the unbeliever is quite in a bind. On one hand, he wants to argue against the Bible on the basis that it has what he believes to be contradictions. On the other hand, apart from the truth of the Bible, there would be no basis for arguing that contradictions are always wrong. Why? Because the Bible presents the clearest, most consistent form of argument that explains things like the laws of logic. So even starting at the first premise in his argument against the Bible assumes that the Bible is the case. Yeah. So God is evil, to be evil is to be wrong. God is evil in the Bible, therefore God is wrong. To assume any of those points assumes a worldview that the person cannot have. If they're a naturalist, what is evil? What is good? How do you define those things? And there are books that try to do that and say, whatever supports survival. So we see that in
whatever brings harm
in Dawkins' book.
Survival of whom? Let's say bacteria.
Right. Or to say,
is it okay that
or species?
Or do we? Why do we privilege the human beings if there are other species, right?
Mm-hmm, right. Yeah, and you could say that we're both a benefit and a harm depending on how you look at it. Yeah. So why is that the case? Or we see with science, science has changed and has not. I should say the way that science is done has changed, and so to be dogmatic in on how we approach science is we can't say we can't say we've always used the scientific method. We found a better way, and so far the scientific method seems to work. But what if we discover that 222nd dimension of string theory, and all of a sudden theorems go out the window, and we're just presented with cold brute facts or contradictory items to our eyes? How do we look at those things? So, Schrodinger's cat kind of hints at that. Yeah. You can hold two
hat
two
or
things.
His cat.
Well, either one.
Oh, okay.
Whatever you put in the box.
Schrodinger's hat and the cat in the hat.
Yes. So to rationally resolve this issue, the unbeliever would have to either, one, embrace the truth of the Bible, which they cannot do. That's what they're arguing against. Or they would have to reject the premise that contradictions are always false, in which case that person would not be able to cogently argue that the Bible is wrong for
so the
allegedly
issue,
having them.
Exactly. So the issue is, why are contradictions wrong, right? And how do you justify the claim that contradictions are wrong?
Sure.
Do you justify it by your experience? All the contradictions that I've experienced so far have been wrong. Okay, that's fine. What about in the future? Things change. How do we know that won't be the case in the future, right? Well, that's silly. Well, is it? I mean, that's your worldview needs to take that into consideration. The Christian worldview says we know contradictions are wrong. It's because they violate the character of God. You say based on your experience, but you haven't experienced everything. In fact, universal human experience hasn't experienced everything, especially the future.
Right.
At one time, universal human experience said that the sun circled the earth, right? Well, clearly universal human experience, if we want to say it that way, was wrong, right? I mean, the earth spins. That's why we see the sun seems to move in terms of it. So why are contradictions wrong? How do we know they're wrong? How do we know they'll continue to be wrong? Well, how do you justify that, right? It's a silly question. No, it's a question about the consistency of your worldview. Does your worldview allow you to consistently and coherently answer those types of questions? Right? If it doesn't, you need to consider a different worldview. Right. The Christian has an answer.
So that's why in episode 13 we talked about this. Don't answer. You're more than welcome and free, and Lyle's book is a testament to that, to answer the objection that is raised. However, there are a means by which we can actually take a step back from that question and say, well, let's not answer according to what standard you present. God in the Bible commands the slaughter of innocent people. Okay, well, yes, he does, and let's try and make a way for us to not talk about this in a strict legalistic manner, or we can say, okay, first of all, why is killing of innocents wrong, and also, what do you determine as innocence? Because within that question, there's the assumption that who God commanded Israel to kill were innocent people, and we know from just our study in last episode was there's no one righteous, no, not one. So, according to in God's mind, in God's standard, there's no one who's innocent except Christ, and so.
And it's a moral question. Why, what is the standard, the moral standard that's being violated, and who determines that that's the standard? Mm-hmm. Do I individually? Do we collectively as a nation, a society? Who determines what the standard is, right? And can the standard change? And what's the basis of the standard?
Yeah.
Well, the Christian has an answer. Standard is the character of God.
Pluto was a planet. Pluto is no longer a planet. Long live Pluto.
Yeah.
Yes.